I've got some questions about where we're at with the regional forest agreements.
Senator, just to be clear, we've got Dr. Box here. So your questions earlier on about the piping plover, during the break, we also talked to the regulatory section, so we're actually able to deal with those as well in this section. So I just wanted to give you that heads up.
Okay, good. I'll go on to those then. So with the regional forest agreements, I want to know the current status of the proposed extension to the regional forest agreements in New South Wales and WA.
Thank you, Senator. Matthew Dadswell, Acting First Assistant Secretary, Biodiversity Conservation Division. I think in the case of New South Wales, the Commonwealth and New South Wales governments are still negotiating those the extension to those RFAs, and they with those RFAs to be completed before the end of 2018 is the expectation.
The
extension of those to be completed by 2018.
So within the next 2 months then?
Yes.
Yes. The government hasn't yet responded to the third five-year review report for New South Wales?
Again, Senator, we're also working with New South Wales on that review and the government's response.
And so will that be completed and made public before the completion of the RFA extension?
Senator, it'll be completed at or before the time of the RFA extension, yes.
And how is the government responding to the reviewer's assessment that with most submitters rejecting native forest logging and wanting it to end immediately on public land and to be tightly controlled on private land?
Senator, there was a comprehensive consultation process as part of the extension process.
And that's the consultation. That's the response of that consultation.
And the governments are looking at the outcomes of that consultation process in finalising the extensions.
Okay. What's being done to ensure that the New South Wales RFA is consistent with the EPBC Act, given the proposed intensification of logging in New South Wales and fewer fauna surveys?
Senator, the regional forest agreements provide a support for or put in place support for ecological sustainable forest management by the state agency.
Which by definition, any logging is ecologically sustainable forest management.
And the RFA has overarching principles in terms of maintenance of a car reserve system, of the application of ecologically sustainable forest management principles, and those practices are assessed as being whether they will not be consistent with ecological sustainable forest management principles. If they are, they'll be supported under the agreement.
And so, how is that assessment going to be made?
That's a matter of that's the discussion that's occurring between the Commonwealth and the state at the moment.
But you're going to finalise the RFA within the next 2 months. And what assessment have you done then to determine whether the intensification of logging practices is consistent with ecologically sustainable forest management?
Well, again, we talk with the state and ensure that those their proposed or both current and future proposed forest management practices are consistent with the principles of ecologically sustainable forest management. So what
assessment have they done? Can you tell me what have they done with the proposed intensification to ensure that it's ecologically sustainable?
So I don't have that detail with me. Yeah, I'll take it on notice.
Have native title holders for the border ranges been consulted on logging changes and the proposed intensification when they've clearly said they don't want logging on their lands?
I'll have to take that on notice, Senator. I'm not privy to that level of detail which New South Wales government might have done.
Moving to Victoria, there's recently the Victorian government have undertaking experiments of the impacts of logging on listed threatened species to see whether they're going to survive. Do you consider that those experiments are considered to be exempt from the EPBC Act in the way that other logging operations under the RFAs are?
Senator, it's difficult for me to comment on those. I'm not sure what experiments you're referring to.
Well, it was
Senator.
basically logging of known threatened species, greater gliders that were known, which just, to me, cannot possibly fit the definition of ecologically sustainable forest management. So it was an experiment to see how they were going to survive under intensive logging.
Under the regional forest agreements, there's support for adaptive forest management, and as part of applying those ecological sustainable forest management practices and those within the production forest, we expect that states will draw on all available research and information in improving their practices.
And so you consider those experiments, however, are included under the exemptions under the RFAs, or should they have been assessed under the EPBC Act?
Again, I'm not privy to the details of those experiments. Again, it's a matter. The forest management is a matter for the state government.
It's up to the state government, and so you're hands off. So even if it's something that's wouldn't otherwise be happening under the RFA, you're not interested enough to even do any further investigation of it.
Again, Senator, I'm not privy to the detail of those experiments.
Okay. Can you tell me, under the RFAs, what work is the federal government doing to assess the impact of logging? We're rolling over the RFAs on threatened species. In particular, we've already discussed the situation with leadbeater's possum, but swift parrot, greater gliders, the WA cockatoos, any number of them. Is the federal government doing any independent assessment of the impact of logging on those species?
Senator, the RFAs are a framework agreement. They provide for a comprehensive, adequate, representative reserve system to protect threatened species. They also provide for ecologically sustainable forest management by the state agency. The states have requirements to draw upon conservation advices and recovery plans prepared by that have been prepared, where those recovery plans talk about impacts of logging and so forth, and they would be considered by the state in the application of their forest management practices.
As part of the reviews of the RFA, is the federal government doing any further independent research, or is it just up to the states to say, yes, we're ticking that off?
Again, Senator, we're about maintaining the existing framework of the regional forest agreements, not on a case-by-case species assessment. That is related to the work that goes into assessing threats to species and their formation of conservation advices and
so what I
recovery
hear you
plans.
saying is that there's no further investigation being done by the Commonwealth as part of the review of the RFAs on the impacts of logging on these threatened species. It's up to the states to do their own research.
As part of their forest management, as part of maintaining ecological sustainable forest management practices.
But can I just confirm that under the EPBC Act, it's the Commonwealth, and now under the international agreements that we have signed to be protecting threatened species, it's the Commonwealth which is accountable for whether these species are heading towards extinction. Correct?
But these questions are in relation to the regional forest agreements,
Yes,
which are
but
not
it's
the
the
EPBC
Commonwealth
Act.
which is accountable. Isn't that the case?
Commonwealth is a state party to international agreements, yes.
Yes. So you are the responsible party for whether these threatened forest-dwelling animals, their conservation status, and to stop them from going extinct.
Well, ultimately, we absolutely have responsibilities under the EPBC Act. We absolutely have that accountability through to the international agreements. We're the ones that would do the reporting as a nation on our actions to date. But obviously, that has to be acknowledged that this is a federation, and there's an absolute role for the state governments as well. Part of that is implementing the RFAs, as Mr. Dadswell has already outlined.
And so if there are inadequate or non-existent recovery plans, you just say we can't do anything about it because it's the states are doing it.
Just go back to, so the RFAs are effectively an assessment and approval process. The large part of that assessment happened 20 years ago with significant offsets for the assessment of values. Since then, we've been working within an adaptive framework with the state agencies to adapt as new information becomes available on species, and amendments might be made in terms of prescriptions.
But what I'm asking is whether the Commonwealth is doing any of that research and that assessment of whether in fact these species are being adequately protected by those reserve systems, or whether there needs to be further changes to forest management to ensure, under your Commonwealth responsibility and your accountability, that these species are not going to become more and more threatened and endangered.
To the extent that we assess and look at the requirements of species.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Senator Cornelius.